Welcome to Caregiver Chats. I'm Dr. Lakelyn. Today, we're talking about how caregivers can prepare for severe weather. So stay tuned and we'll get into it. Hi there, I'm your host, Dr. Lakelyn. I'm a gerontologist and caregiving advocate for Home Instead, an honor company. Today's episode is a bonus episode. My hometown was recently hit by a series of tornadoes. While there was a lot of damage in our community, thankfully, everyone is okay. One of the many stories that has surfaced was about a family caregiver who sprung into action to protect their loved one. During the storm, a quadriplegic man with multiple sclerosis, or MS, was in his hospital bed in an upstairs bedroom. The storm moved in so quickly, and there was no time to move him. So his caregiver, his wife, and their son decided to use their own bodies to protect them. They surrounded him, and the roof happened to collapse on them, but thankfully everyone was okay. This story and many others had me thinking about older adults and their caregivers. I asked myself, is severe weather and natural disasters something caregivers are planning for? Is this something that me and my own family have been planning for? Well, I wanted to chat with an expert on this topic and help us all think through a plan for severe weather. Today, I am really looking forward to talking more about this with my colleague and emergency response specialist, Jen Masotja-Wright. Hi, Jen. How are you? Welcome.
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm so glad you're joining us. Thanks for being here. I know you have worked in the field of emergency response for over 15 years, I believe. So could you tell us a little bit about, how you got into this and why we should be talking about severe weather before it strikes?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been, I think just over 15 years now. I started with the state of Oregon, working with the Oregon Health Authority, working on vulnerable populations planning. So how are we going to make sure that our assisted care facilities and long-term nursing skilled facilities are prepared and ready for earthquakes, all hazards, whether it's a train derailment or a flood or anything in between. We're really good at fire response across the country because they've been drilling that into us for our whole lives, starting in kindergarten. But we're not all quite as versed in all the rest of the hazard responses. So I've worked at all levels of government, nonprofit, and now I'm so pleased to be with Honor to bring some of that experience to help make sure that we can deliver quality care no matter what's happening outside.
Awesome. Well, gosh, that is such a wealth of knowledge that you're bringing us today. I'm very excited to talk more about this, as excited as you can be about severe weather, which I'm sure, this is your day in and day out. So I know we're going to learn so much great information from you. So why should we start thinking about this before the crisis or before severe weather strikes or before the emergency?
Yeah, it's, because we never know when it's going to happen is my first answer. Most people are like, oh, I don't live in a hurricane zone, or I don't live here or there. I don't have tornadoes. But the reality is that everyone in every part of the country experiences some kind of inconvenience or disruption or displacement due to something, whether it's the mass protest event or sadly, an act of terrorism or something like that. It could be even just a long-term power outage, right? We've all experienced power outages. And it's really important to think about, how will I manage that event? If it's a loss of power and I have medicine I need or food, if I have a baby, do I have enough diapers and foods and items for that individual, even our pets. And so it's really important that we take a moment when we're not stressed, when we're not having to act quickly and immediately, to really just think about what can I do, who should I tell, where will I go, and also to have some alternate plans. So maybe your initial plan isn't going to work. And so to have some backup ideas as well, and to have those conversations with your family today rather than when you're already in crisis.
That is such great advice. We talk about that on this podcast in a variety of contexts, planning ahead before a crisis occurs, because in that crisis situation, you're stressed, emotions are heightened. You might not have the opportunity to do the research or to, create a plan in retrospect. So having these conversations early is really, really important. And you mentioned some of the common situations already, but what are some of those types of severe weather or situations that people should be planning for, especially if they're caring for an older loved one?
I would say things that impact our transportation hubs are really the things that impact our care the most. And so if you're talking about, icy, snowy road conditions that are unsafe to drive on or more difficult to drive on, flooded roadways, anything that impairs our ability to show up for our clients and be able to arrive safely and timely and be able to provide that care and support, and also for our caregivers to be able to end the visit as scheduled and get home safely back to their residents. So anything that impacts, I feel like our transportation is really the biggest one. And then also I would right there second would be power failures or utility disruptions, just because it can have really severe impacts on all of us, but especially folks who may need additional supports.
Those are things that I guess I didn't consider. Of course, I live in a climate with severe weather, so I know about driving safety during snowy weather. But one thing I think consider enough is like a power outage and all those things that you might need during that time. And so I think those are some great things for us to consider. And if it's a family caregiver caring for a loved one, are there any other things that they should be thinking through in terms of preparing their loved one for kind of an emergency or crisis situation?
Yeah, I think, and lots of times we think about power outages in cold weather, but they can also be just as deadly or dangerous in hot weather. If we have a power failure during the middle of a heat wave and now we're in a building and maybe our loved one is unable to move out of their bed independently, or we're not able to provide that support, if they've got insulin that requires refrigerator or other needs that are required. So when you talk about extreme weather, we can go either way, right? It could be really, really hot or really, really cold. I think for caregivers, it's a really great time to a lot of folks sometimes get scared with the idea of like, oh, I've got to go spend hundreds of dollars to get these things to be prepared. And the reality is all we need to know is where that stuff is we use every day, right? So we already have blankets. We already have, flashlights, but are the batteries fresh? We have the medications, but do we have enough? Is there a way for us to work with our care provider to maybe get an emergency supply? And some insurance companies will do that now. They'll give you like a 90-day supply at a time so that you can make sure that if you're cut off from being able to get to your pharmacy for a couple of days, you'll still have enough medication to get you through. And also, I think we always think about like the life safety items, but the comfort, calm, and reassure is also equally important. So do you have a favorite blanket or a pillow or an item or a picture that like means the world to you? And if you have to evacuate or you aren't going to be able to, use your cell phone for a long period of time or see your loved one you usually see every day, is there something that can bring you that comfort and calm and reassuring you that things are going to be okay and that they are still with you, and just those comfort items? Also activities like a deck of cards or crossword books or coloring books, like something to keep our brains, humans are very good with tasks. And so if we have a task, then it helps us pass time and it helps us feel like we're adding value and participating in the moment. And so having something to do, and then those things that you just love, like I can't go a day without my Burt's Beeswax chapstick, right? So I have to have my chapstick, and other people have things they need to have. And so thinking about having a few extra of those on board. And lastly, I'll just say, if there is some things you feel like you need to stockpile, you don't have to get them all in one day. So you could, every shopping trip, grab a bag of beans or some, shelf stable food to have just a little bit extra, but you don't have to go completely fill your pantry and start anew.
Those are so many really helpful tips. And I love that you mentioned those comfort items. I think a lot of family caregivers, they're supporting someone with cognitive impairment too. So, in those situations, it can be confusing and it can put them out of their routine. And so having those comfort items available, I'm sure can be very reassuring to the individual and helpful from the caregiver's perspective too. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And you've kind of talked about some of the things to potentially include in an emergency kit. What are some other items that might be good to have on hand? You had mentioned, already like a flashlight, maybe some extra food, medication. That's of course really important for, older adults. Many of those medications are a matter of life or death or can significantly impact their health. So that's really important. But beyond those three things, what are some other things to think about?
I mean, a light's really important. So beyond a flashlight, some other great options are like glow sticks because they're non-toxic. And you actually, if you put a jug of water on them, they become like a lantern, but you have no flame to worry about. You have no off-gassing to worry about. So glow sticks can be helpful. You can also like drop them, like one in the bathroom and one in the hallway and one in the kitchen. So if your lights are out or you need assistance, for individuals who may struggle getting to those places, they'll have some marks along the way, kind of like in your airplane. You know, they've got those strips down the side that say where to go. And so glow sticks they're very affordable and they're really great. Keeping your cell phones charged or keeping an external charger ready to go at all times. So like those little separate charging devices is really helpful. Any kind of emergency contact numbers. Because in case our phones die, we don't have numbers memorized anymore. Looking at my list, I have just a few other things like waterproof matches are really helpful. Maybe like ponchos or any extra items of clothing. And it's really great if people can get like a portable radio. They have those wind up radios, which can get rather exhausting, but to have a weather radio so that you can stay tuned into that's how we emergency managers will communicate with folks is through those channels. And so if you they're about $15, I think, to get one, and just a nice handy thing to have on board so that you can listen to what the officials are recommending. And, some water is ultimately, that is so important to our health. First aid kit. But again, if you think about everything I've mentioned, you probably already have all of those things in your home right now. And so the one other thing I would suggest is for folks who are living at home, grab a bin, an empty bin or an empty box, and drop a few of those items in it and put that in a closet or a garage or somewhere that's accessible. And now you've got your kit started. And every time you think like, oh, I really wish I had a deck of cards, you can drop one in there. And that's as complicated as it needs to be. It's really quite easy when we take the pressure off and really think about it.
Yes. I love that glow stick tip. I would have never thought about a glow stick. And also that can bring a little color, a little fun in maybe a stressful situation too. But one thing, we just had tornadoes go through our community and we were talking about footwear. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's maybe something that people don't necessarily stop to consider. What are you wearing on your feet? Because, if you're wearing sandals or flip-flops, that might not be as safe as tennis shoes or something that's secure to your foot. So would that be another tip, Jen? If an emergency is taking place, if you can quickly put on a pair of tennis shoes, any other kind of clothing related items that you would suggest for people to just maybe have an extra set in a basement or in that emergency kit, because, in the moment that might not be your first thought, but it can go in a long way in protecting you from a health perspective if you have proper footwear.
Yeah, like rubber boots for flooding if you've got a pair that you could throw in the basement. Or we talk a lot about footwear for earthquakes. Same thing as tornadoes, honestly, because when glass is shattered, flying debris, roadways are covered, it is important. You can't wear your stilettos, through a tornado zone. So having a really good like hiking boot or a good quality shoe is super important to have available to you. And I think another thing for tornadoes specifically, they often say like, go to the basement or take shelter. Well, some of our folks can't do that. Some of the people that we're caring for and love deeply, we can't move them that easily. And so there's some other great options. For the most important thing is to provide protection of their head and their neck and their shoulders. And so we also need to make sure we keep airways open and available. And so there's some good ways to think about piling some pillows and a blanket while also keeping, enough of a tent over faces so that we're not inhibiting breathing. But that way, if a ceiling does fall in or something does crash down, they're having some protection over their head and neck so that we're trying to minimize any, long-term impacts. But having like extra blankets and sleeping bags and stuff is a really great way to provide some padding if you need it.
Those are some additional really great tips and so helpful. And again, these are all things people have generally in their house. So I'm glad to hear that we don't have to go out and purchase all these things. We just need to kind of bring them together in one central location, if you will. And so as family caregivers or as families are thinking through their plan, I would imagine it's important to kind of share that plan, or maybe do you even suggest families kind of do a little practice, or what are some of your best practices from that perspective?
Yeah, communication plans are super important, and it's not something that people think about all the time. So that would be something like, if something happens and I can't call you, what can you anticipate I'm going to do? Is there a meeting location? Like, are we all going to meet at the school that's close by? Or I'm an older adult who has mobility issues. Maybe my goal is to stay in my house. I'm going to move to an interior room and I'm going to wait because I know that my family is going to do everything they can to get to me. It's safer for me maybe to stay put. So having those conversations now about how will I communicate with you? If I do leave, should I leave a note on my door that says where I am or who I'm with, so that if you do come to help me and I'm gone, I say, I went to the Red Cross shelter at the local elementary school, something like that. So thinking about those in advance. Another really, I think, important thing is lots of times we'll have emergency backup plans, but maybe your emergency plan is me and I'm across town. Well, I can't get to you. So something I really encourage people to do is talk to your neighbors, because you'll always be able to get to your neighbors. And so thinking about, and they don't have to be your long-term care provider. They don't have to be an expert in, high transfers or what your exact care plan might look like, but they can be someone who can get to you right away and advocate for your needs. And so I think it's good to knock on those doors, build some relationships, and have a plan of saying, hey, if something really bad happens, will you be able to come check on my mom, or will you be able to come check on my husband? And if I'm not here, and then what does that communication look like? Are we going to evacuate? What does that look like? So I know we just had a really bad ice storm in Portland. I think it was in February. And I went to both of my elderly neighbors' homes and just said, I'm going to the grocery store. I'm comfortable driving in this. Can I bring you guys something? And just knowing that there are those people close by that can be of a support to you, I think is really important for those initial, they're like your first responders. And we always say that in emergency management, that first responders are so important, but they aren't always the first person on site. Lots of times it's the car behind you, it's the neighbor, it's the, another person on the street. So it's really important to invest like in your immediate local environment and see what kind of relationships you can build.
Again, some more really helpful tips. And I think that, in general, it's great to get to know your neighbors for so many reasons. There's so many benefits to that. But in this conversation, they can be so helpful and crucial. And because you're right, that family member might not be able to get there right away. And so great to kind of communicate that plan out. And then from kind of a resource perspective, Jen, are there certain organizations that we should kind of like on Facebook or follow to stay up to date? I would imagine kind of like the National Weather Service might be one of those organizations, but anything else that you would encourage folks to look into as they put together these plans and resources?
There's a few really great options for staying connected locally. So FEMA, which I know is a national organization, the Federal Emergency Management Response Agency, is really, they have a great app that actually interfaces with other local, like Red Crosses and St. Vincent de Paul's, that will pull up if shelters are open, if there's severe weather in your area. So that's a really great app to put on your phone if you're into that. Also, a lot of communities, in fact, I have not found one yet that doesn't have some kind of public alert system. It might be called something a little bit different, but if you Google like your parish or community name or county name, and then public alerts or emergency alerts, something's going to pop up that you can opt in for. And they'll then do the same thing. So if you end up in a wildfire evacuation route, or the hurricanes are coming, or there's a tornado coming, they'll be sending you information. And also on the recovery side of that, they'll also say, where are resources available? Where are there shelters? Where is there food delivery? Where can I get supplies? Who can help me clean up? And so those local resources are really, really helpful. And then always the Red Cross is an expert at this. They've been doing it for a long time. The one thing I would say about the Red Cross is they look different in every state. And so in some states, they're everything. And then like in Oregon, they're still super important, but they've partnered with local government. And so sometimes it's a government shelter supported by the Red Cross. So just kind of get to know what the Red Cross looks like in your area, because they often they pop up an 800 number almost immediately, and you can call that to get support and resources and connect you. And then at Honor, part of our service to our clients and care pros and headquarters staff is that I will be monitoring 24/7 to be able to send out alerts. I might not be your first alert, but I'm going to do my very best to get you that information as soon as possible and let you know that we're here. And, we're not on the ground always, but we're going to do everything we can to help support anyone who engages with us, and to try to help support their response or their recovery.
Wonderful organizations. I'm going to go out and download the app and bookmark all of those helpful resources. And we'll be sure to link to those as well in our show notes, so that listeners, family caregivers can go follow them as well. And I think you made such a great point, Jen, when you are working with a service provider like a home care agency, they also have emergency kind of plans in place. And often our care professionals are ones that stay with a client during inclement weather, or will do everything to get the care pro to the client's house in a snowstorm or whatnot, just to make sure that our clients are well cared for. So that can be another resource for families. If you do have services in the home, you can ask about, what is their response or their plans for responding to emergency situations. So another important resource to keep in mind.
And we also spend a lot of time looking at preparedness too. So not just the response side, but like informing and educating from the start so that we don't have to catch you up in the moment. We've already given you the information and the tools and the access so that you can, be ready when it hits. So that's also helpful besides the response and recovery. It's great. It's a great additional.
Yes, they're both equally important. Absolutely. Being prepared and then knowing, how to respond. And so hopefully by listening today, folks can think through their preparedness and communicate that to everyone involved in that kind of circle of care for their aging loved ones. And Jen, is there anything else that we haven't covered today that you think family caregivers should keep top of mind when they are thinking about these various natural disasters or emergency type situations?
I think one thing I've come up to a lot is this conversation about, do we evacuate or not? And I think it's a really important conversation to have. When you're a caregiver, you have someone who's medically fragile or who has, like we were talking about before, maybe a cognitive impairment. Weighing the risk of evacuating versus staying and how that will impact their health and well-being, and also what you're capable of doing and not, and just really thinking that through, and also realizing that can evolve. So maybe today I'm like, oh yeah, we could definitely evacuate, but based on the needs of my loved one in 6 months, maybe that isn't actually our best bet. And so I think that having an idea about that in advance is very helpful, to really just like get solid in what that looks like and then revisit it. Something else you mentioned is practice your plan. Actually drive the route if you can, if you've got an evacuation route that you're intending to go on, like do some muscle memory activities, because when we have that panic and that emergency stress, our brains tend to shut down a little bit. But if we've taken those actions, we've walked to that cabinet, we've gotten out that box, we've gone through it, we've driven the route, we've evacuated the person, we've taken some of those steps, we're going to be able to do those quicker and more efficiently than we would have done if that was the first time. So I think practice is important, and really thinking about what is the best decision for your family and revisiting that to make sure that it's still applicable.
Such a wonderful point about needing to revisit. And I think, not only maybe every spring or whenever inclement weather is most common, wherever you're located, that's a great time to revisit. But then also anytime there's a major health event, I think is a really important time to revisit. As you mentioned, today, my loved one's in pretty good health, their mobility's pretty good, but maybe in 6 months, if there's a fall or a diagnosis, that might be a good time to reevaluate. So such great points. And I love also the muscle memory. That's so true with so much of what we do in life. If you practiced it, practice makes perfect. And we're not looking for perfection, of course, in these situations, but, just going through it. I mean, I remember as a child, doing the tornado drills at school. And now my kiddo's in daycare and they practice the tornado drills and the fire drills. And they do it for a reason because, as you mentioned, we can just get in that kind of panic mode. And if we've practiced it before, then that memory will hopefully kick in and help us make the best decisions to the best of our abilities in those situations.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely true.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Jen. I have learned so much through our conversation. I'm so excited for those tuning in to learn from you as well. And we just appreciate your time and expertise today. And we hope that those listening don't ever have to act upon these plans. But of course, it's so important to have in place. So thank you for all that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to come back anytime.
I want to thank Jen for joining me. I hope the information we have shared on this bonus episode is helpful in preparing you for severe weather. If you have any caregiving stories or tips related to severe weather, you can email me at caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. That's caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. I invite you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Home Instead Inc. That's Home Instead INC for previews of upcoming episodes, caregiving tips, and more. And you can find all of the links from today's episode in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and please remember to take good care of yourself while you care for others. Caregiver Chats is brought to you by Home Instead. If you're looking for in-home care to support you on your caregiving journey, please visit homeinstead.com to learn more.